Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Projects and Pajamas. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you so much for all the warm and well wishes I got on my last video. That really means a lot to me, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I can't believe it took me 6 months to edit this video, but I finally did it. It's finally finished. So without further ado, here's the making of my Captain America dress. I started out by cutting out a full circle skirt. Then I marked where my center front line was for the front closure. From the remaining fabric, I puzzled in the rest of my pattern pieces. Next up was the red and white waist piece. Then I used transfer paper to transfer the patterns on both sides of my fabric. Because the white cotton was a little see-through, I used 2 layers instead of 1. So before assembling the red and white pieces, I basted the 2 layers together first. Then it was assembly time. Starting out with the center back panel, working towards the sides, making sure I place the right seams together. Precision is extra key when you have a lot of seams. Just 1 millimeter off leads to double that amount times the number of seams you have, and that can quickly add up. After pinning them all, I stitched them all together and serged the edges. Even though being precise, mine indeed ended up a tad too small, which I had to correct later on. After that, I pressed all seams flat, making sure they were pressed towards the red panels. Then I serged the top and bottom of the waist piece. Moving on to the bodice, I stitched the darts. And serged the side, shoulder and waist seam. Then I used a tailor's hem to press and shape the darts. Next I pinned and stitched the waist piece to the bodice. And again press the seam flat. Moving on to the sleeves, I marked the lines for my turn-up folds and basted it with a machine stitch. Then I sewed the top half of my seam towards the marked point and made an incision there. I pressed that seam open and turned the remaining seam to the outside. Then I sewed the remainder of the seam and pressed it open as well. Then I folded the seam up and pressed right on the basted line. I stitched the seam down before turning it up again and pressed it flat. And there you have a neatly finished turn-up sleeve. Before putting the sleeves in, I basted a gathering stitch and stitched my shoulder seams. Using the gathering stitch, I divided the volume as even as possible. Once I was happy with the volume placement, I sewed the sleeves in and serged the sleeves and bodice seams together. So far we have done the top, the sleeves are in with a nice turn up. As you can see, my dummy is way smaller than I am. It's actually not my dummy, it's my friend's dummy. And I'm a bit of a dummy. But I've got my other projects on my own one. So, all these threads. Right now I'm going to do the skirt. Oh yeah, and this is my little hat that I bought. Little Facinator. It is from Collectif. And it was about 35 euros. So let's see how that looks with it when it's finished. But yeah, let's do the skirt. Moving on to the skirt, I pinned and sewed my pockets to each skirt panel and pressed the seam flat. Then pinned and sewed the front and back pockets pieces together and serged the edges for a clean finish. Okay, now I have a little bit of a tricky part. So I've sewn on and overlocked the pocket. My side seams of my skirt are still loose. So I'm now going to stitch those together. But first I have to make a little incision so my seams will lay flat. So this is my back panel, this is my front panel on the bottom. and I want my seams to lay together to the back, which won't happen right now. So what I'm going to do, this is where my pocket opening starts, so I'm going to cut towards that. There, and also on the bottom. There you go. If you can see that. Right. So now what I can do is I can turn my pocket that way and my seam that way. Like so. Just going to pin that down here as well. And then I'm going to sew my side seams to that point, and then from that point to the hem. And then the pocket is done, and the side seams as well. And you have a nice, sturdy, well finished skirt or pockets or whatever. Okay, so here you can see the pocket is nice and tidy inside and ironed. There you go. I have stitched a basting line 2 centimeters from the edge for my hem, and I'm going to press it towards that line, and then I'm going to press it again on that line, and then I can stitch it. And that's my rolled hem. Okay, so this is how the hem looks. I've sewn it. I need to do a final press, but I'm going to do that once the whole dress is finished. So now let me find my center front. I have made a marking here, which I'm going to cut now. I'm not going to cut it all the way down to where it's supposed to be, because I just want to be sure. I can always, I can always go lower if needed, but yeah.
I serged the waist of my skirt and then pinned and sewed it to the bodice.
Alright, I've put my interfacing on my edge. I don't know what to call it right now. As you can see, I've put it there where it meets and not over it, because otherwise I think you would have seen like nasty bulks here. And then I've basted a big stitch right where this one falls on the skirt. I've drawn out on my skirt where it should go, and I'm going to pin it, and hopefully it will match up. Now while stitching, I'm still going to leave this closed, or uncut I should say, just to be safe, and I know to where exactly to cut it. Stitch. So this one will be underneath and the other side will be on top, so this one will not have the point, but will be tucked into between the other side and the skirt. It will be sandwiched, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's a bit tricky. I haven't done this a lot either, so for me it's still a little bit touch and go, but we'll see. As you can see, I have sewn on the lapel, and then I pressed it to the outside because I want this line to be a little bit raised, and I've done so on the other side, and then I've gone ahead and press on my basting line and turn that in. So basically this acts as some sort of bias tape that finish off the edges. So now I'm going to cut my line further to that line. Am I going to say this correctly? No. I am going to cut that way. There. Yeah, right. So that way this one comes out on top, and then I can go ahead and cut this off. Okay, now let me cut the other. Okay, so I pressed this one down, this one is tucked underneath there, and that one goes there. So this is on top. This one is tucked in there and goes like that. Right? Then I've drawn on my point, and then I'm going to reopen this one and press my point. So what I'm going to do is actually sew this with a running stitch on the edge by hand towards this point, and then later on I'm going to top stitch it on the edge just for a nice finish, but that's just to keep things neat and in place and not like
starts going up. So I've got two collars here, one with interlining and one without. This one goes on the bottom and this one goes on top. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew on the top here. Let me pin these together. Alright, so I have sewn, you can probably see it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to thin out the seam allowance and then we're going to press it open. Now I always do first half. Yeah. And then on the side, which is going to be the good side, that's on the outside, I'm going to trim that down half again. If you can see it, where seam allowance are uneven, and that is so your seam, once it's pressed down, it will be as flat as possible. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to press this to this side, and then we're going to top stitch the seam. So I've top stitched it, so if you can see that, just on the edge, and then I pressed the collar down. There we go. So you have a nice flat collar. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open it up again and then turn it inside out. And then make sure you roll that one back, and I'm going to I'm going to stitch down there, and then that way you have a really clean and crisp corner. So let's do that first. Stitch that down. I know it's hard to see with the there we go. And I'm going to thin this out. Alright, now we can turn it inside out. I'm just going to use my ruler. And there we have a very nice and clean corner. And then we can press this down and sew it onto the dress. I've stitched the collar from the beginning of the collar to the shoulder points shut, flat, and then I did the same on the other side. And this is still open, and that's because we're going to turn our seam allowance in, like so, later on. And that's how the neckline will be nicely finished. But this will be sandwiched between our facing. So I've already prepared it, as you can see. This one's also with a red interfacing, and this will come on the inside, like so. And then the collar will be stitched in, nice and tidy. So let's pin this down first. We're going to sew this line first, and then we're going to do the same as we did with the collar, and then press it down before we stitch the collar down. I've sewn the insides, and then I thinned the seam out, and then I top stitched to there, and then I switched, if you can see, I made a little incision and then turned to where my fabric lays, because this is the lapel, and the lapel goes straight here and then it turns that way, so that way you don't have any of the top stitching visible there. I will be top stitching here, but I wanted to have the lapel collar nice and clean. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna turn it back out, and then the color, and then if you can see it, so this is the color. It's turned down, so the seam allowance is up, and then I'm going to fold this back and I'm going to stitch that. So what will happen is the collar will be sandwiched between my bodice with my top, and then, so as you can see, stitch like that. I'm going to turn it inside out. Your collar will be, this is the inside of your top, the outside, this will be your lapel. So let's stitch that. Okay, so that has been sewn on, and then again we're going to thin it out. And then when you come to the shoulder seam, what we're going to do is, let's cut only that one, and then we're going to cut towards the point diagonally, right there. And this one. And that's because that way we can turn this inwards. There. So this one is laying that way, and this one coming to inwards. Now that one goes like that. It's hard to see with this dark color, I know. Let's trim this side. There we go. And then I can turn it inside out. I'm going to use my ruler again to get that point nice and sharp. There we go. So and then I'm going to press this nicely, and then this one we attach to the shoulder seam, so that one it stays put. We do the same on the other side, and then we're going to turn in the seam allowance so this one's nicely finished. And last, before we do the buttons and the buttonhole, is we're going to top stitch here all the way down to there, to about the same point where you've hit, where you switched the top stitch here on top. And then we can move on to the final step, and that's buttons and buttonholes. Yay! Okay, let's do this. I use a running stitch to sew the color down for a nice and clean finish. And here is the result. I really enjoyed wearing this dress at our Dapperday outing in Disneyland Paris. I paired her with a brown braided belt and a big star pin to represent the star Cap wears on his chest. I used my backpack to mimic his shield harness, and I wore my royal vintage saddle shoes which complemented the outfit. Unfortunately, it was slightly chilly that day, so I wore a cropped cardigan to add a little bit more warmth. And there she is, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video of how I made my Captain America Disney bound dress, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!